She wasn't looking for a husband, only a place to be forgotten. The letter in her pocket was a map to a life she did not want, leading to a cousin she had never met. But it was the only map she had left, and the Wyoming wind was tearing the old one to pieces. The sky had turned the color of a bruise. Abigail Miller pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around her daughter, Rose, whose small face was pale with cold. Their wagon sat uselessly a mile back, its axle split clean in two by a rock hidden under a drift of early snow. Hope had splintered with it. Now, they walked, two small figures against an endless canvas of gray rock and dying grass. "Are we almost there, Mama?" Rose asked, her voice thin as a bird's call. Abigail forced a smile, the muscles in her face stiff from the cold. "Almost, sweetheart. Just over this next rise." She had been saying that for an hour. The truth was, she was lost. The landmarks her late husband, Thomas, had described in his letter were nowhere to be seen. The creek he called Clear Creek was supposed to be flanked by gentle hills and cottonwood trees. This place was different. The land here was stark and unforgiving, carved by a creek that ran fast and dark, bordered by granite cliffs that looked like broken teeth. The first flakes of snow began to fall, not the gentle kind, but hard, stinging pellets driven by a rising wind. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at Abigail's heart. She had to find shelter. Now, through the swirling snow, she saw it. A dark shape against the white land. A ranch house, smoke curling from a stone chimney like a prayer. It wasn't the welcoming homestead she had imagined, but a fortress built of thick, dark logs, with narrow windows that looked like suspicious eyes. A sign, weathered and barely legible, hung from a post near the gate. It did not say Clear Creek. It said Blackwood Creek Ranch. This was a wrong place. But with the storm closing in, it was the only place. Her knuckles were numb as she knocked on the heavy oak door. She shielded Rose with her body, the wind now a physical force, trying to push them back into the wilderness. For a long moment, there was no answer. She knocked again, louder this time, her desperation growing with every gust of wind. Finally, the bolt scraped back, and the door opened a crack. A man stood there, filling the frame. He was tall and broad, with a face that looked as hard as the land around them. His hair was dark, his jaw set, and his eyes were the color of a winter sky just before a blizzard. They held no welcome, only a deep, settled weariness. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping stone. Abigail's throat felt tight. "I'm sorry to bother you," she began, her words tumbling out in a rush. "My name is Abigail Miller. This is my daughter, Rose. Our wagon broke down. We're looking for my cousin's ranch, Clear Creek, but I think we've taken a wrong turn. The storm." She trailed off, gesturing helplessly at the wall of white that was fast descending upon them. The man's gaze flickered from her face to the small child clinging to her skirt, and something in his expression hardened. He looked at them not as people in need, but as a problem he did not want. "There's no Clear Creek around here," he said flatly. "You're miles off. The nearest town is a day's ride east. You can't make it in this." He made a move to close the door. "Please," Abigail said, her voice cracking. She hated to beg, but her pride was a poor shield against the freezing wind. "Just for the night, until the storm passes. We have nowhere else to go." The man, Samuel Blackwood, hesitated. Every instinct told him to say no. The house was quiet now. He had worked hard to keep it that way. He had no room for strangers, especially not a woman with blonde braids who looked like a ghost of a memory, and a child whose presence was a painful echo of a life that was gone. He had lost his own wife and son in this unforgiving land. He did not need a reminder of what could be taken. Behind him, a small shadow moved. A little girl, no older than 5, with dark, tangled hair and eyes so large and solemn they seemed to hold all the sorrow in the world, peeked out from behind his legs. She clutched a small, faceless doll made of corn husks. She had not spoken a word in over a year, not since the day the creek had taken her mother and brother. Samuel's jaw tightened. "I can't help you," he said, his voice low and final. He began to shut the door. But then, the little girl did something she had not done in a year. She let go of her father's leg. She took one step, then another, moving slowly toward the strangers. Her eyes were fixed on Rose, then they lifted to Abigail. She stopped just inches from them, a tiny, fragile thing in a world of harsh angles. Her small hand reached out, not to touch Abigail, but to gently take Rose's mittened hand. Then she looked up at Abigail, her pale face tilted, her gaze direct and unervingly clear. A breath shuddered through her small frame. In a voice that was barely a whisper, a sound Samuel had thought was lost forever, she spoke. "Mama," the little girl breathed, her eyes welling with tears. "God finally heard us." The world seemed to stop. The wind died down to a low moan. Samuel froze, his hand still on the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stared at his daughter, Hannah, as if seeing a miracle. The word, a name she had not uttered since the funeral, hung in the air, fragile and yet heavier than stone. He looked at Abigail, this stranger who had brought a voice back to his silent house, his expression a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a fear he could not name. Abigail knelt, her own eyes filling with tears at the raw hope in the child's whisper. She did not understand what was happening, but she knew this was more than a mistake. It was a crossroads. Samuel slowly, mechanically, pulled the door open wide. He stepped back, his movements stiff. He couldn't send him away now. Not after that. "You can stay," he said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth, "until the storm breaks." As Abigail guided Rose across the threshold, out of the howling wind and into the heavy, sorrowful warmth of the house, she felt a profound sense of certainty. She had come to the wrong ranch, but for the first time since her husband's death, she wondered if she had ended up in exactly the right place. The inside of the ranch house felt like a memory trapped in amber. A great stone fireplace dominated one wall, its embers glowing weakly, offering little cheer. The furniture was solid and handmade, but worn, the wood dark with age. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, old leather, and a silence that felt heavier than any sound. It was a man's house, a place where softness had been packed away, or had never existed at all. Samuel closed the door, shutting out the storm. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "The guest room is upstairs," he said, not looking at her. "To the left. There are blankets in the chest." He turned and walked toward the fireplace, his broad back a wall between them. He picked up an iron poker and jabbed at the embers, as if fighting a fire only he could see. Abigail stood awkwardly near the door, Rose still clutching her hand. Hannah had not let go of Rose's other hand. The two children stood together, a small island of connection in a sea of unspoken grief. "Thank you," Abigail said to his back. He grunted in response, not turning around. "Come, Rose," Abigail said softly, gently tugging her daughter's hand. She led the girls toward the staircase. The wooden steps creaked under her weight, each sound an intrusion. The house seemed to be holding its breath, watching her. The room at the top of the stairs was cold. A simple bed with a heavy quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a single window that looked out into the swirling white abyss of the storm. It was clean but stark, like a room waiting for a guest who was never expected to arrive. But next to it was another door, slightly ajar. Curiosity, or perhaps a sense of foreboding, pulled Abigail toward it. She pushed it open. This room was different. It was a child's room. A small bed, a rocking horse with a missing eye, and shelves filled with carved wooden animals. But a thick layer of dust covered everything. It was a shrine, not a bedroom. On the wall, a single, faded drawing was pinned. A boy with a wide smile, holding the hand of a woman with dark hair. A lump formed in Abigail's throat. This was his room, the son he had lost. She quickly and quietly closed the door, feeling like an intruder who had stumbled upon a sacred, private sorrow. She returned to the guest room and began to unpack their meager belongings from a canvas satchel. A change of clothes for each of them, a hairbrush, and a worn leather-bound Bible, the only thing of value her husband had left her. As she laid on the bedside table, she noticed something else. A scent, faint but distinct. Lavender. It came from the wardrobe in the corner. Hesitantly, she opened it. Inside, hanging alone, was a woman's dress. It was made of simple blue calico, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It was worn from work and washing, but had been mended with care. This had been his wife's room. They were sleeping in her bed. Abigail quickly shut the wardrobe doors, her heart aching for the man downstairs and the family that had been shattered. She was a ghost in a house already full of them. Downstairs, the hours passed in near silence. Abigail made a simple broth from the supplies in her satchel, sharing it with Rose and a hesitant Hannah, who ate without a word, her eyes darting between Abigail and the kitchen. Samuel did not join them. He sat in his chair by the fire, sharpening a knife with slow, methodical strokes, the rasp of steel on stone the only sound in the house. The storm raged outside, a wild and lonely sound. It sealed them in, cocooning the four of them in this house of memory. Rose, exhausted from the journey, fell asleep on a rug near the hearth, her head pillowed on Hannah's lap. Hannah sat stiffly, watching her new friend breathe, her small hand resting protectively on Rose's shoulder. Abigail cleaned the bowls and put them away, her movements quiet and deliberate. She felt the weight of Samuel's gaze on her, though he never lifted his head. He was watching her, studying her, and she could not begin to guess what he was thinking. Finally, unable to bear the heavy silence any longer, she spoke. "Your daughter," she said softly. "Hannah. She's a beautiful girl." Samuel stopped his work. He placed the knife and stone on the mantel. "She hasn't spoken," he said, his voice low and strained. "Not in a year. Not since the flood." "I'm so sorry," Abigail whispered. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes hollowed out by grief. "Sorry doesn't fix things," he said, his tone not cruel, but brittle, like ice about to crack. "It doesn't bring people back." He stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the blackness. The storm's settling in. Could be days before the pass is clear. He sat like a jail sentence. Abigail knew she should be grateful for the shelter, for the roof over their heads. But as she looked at this broken man and his silent daughter, surrounded by the ghosts of his wife and son, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. The storm, she suspected, was the least of their worries. The real storm was inside these four walls, and it had been raging for a very long time. The next morning, the world was white and silent. The storm had passed, leaving behind a deep, pristine blanket of snow that softened the harsh edges of the land. It was beautiful, but it was also a prison. Abigail looked out the small window of her room and saw that the snow was drifted high against the house, reaching halfway up the door. They were trapped. She dressed quickly and braided her hair, the familiar motions of small comfort in this strange and sorrowful place. Rose was still sleeping soundly, a faint smile on her face. For the first time in months, her daughter had not woken from a nightmare. Downstairs, she found Samuel already by the fire, a steaming tin cup of coffee in his hands. He was staring into the flames, his face grim. He didn't acknowledge her entry. Hannah was on the floor, carefully arranging small stones in a circle around the sleeping form of Rose. She looked up when Abigail entered, her large, dark eyes following Abigail's every move. There was no fear in her gaze, only a quiet, intense curiosity. "Good morning," Abigail said, her voice soft in the still air. Samuel grunted again. It seemed to be his preferred form of communication. "The snow is deep," she stated, trying again. "I don't think we'll be leaving today." "No," he said, his voice flat. "Not today. Not tomorrow either." He took a long swallow of his coffee. "There's coffee on the stove. And oatmeal. Cook it if you want it." It was not an invitation, but a statement of fact. He was providing the bare minimum, nothing more. Abigail went to the kitchen, a small, dark space at the back of the house. It was a woman's kitchen, but it had been neglected. A fine layer of dust coated the shelves, and the pots hung in a disorganized jumble. It was clear that since his wife's death, Samuel had done only what was necessary to survive, and nothing to live. She found the oatmeal and began to prepare a warm breakfast for the children. As she worked, she felt Hannah's presence behind her. The little girl stood in the doorway, watching her with that same unnerving stillness. Abigail smiled at her. "Would you like to help me set the table?" she asked gently. Hannah stared at her for a long moment, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She moved to a low cupboard and carefully took out 3 wooden bowls and 3 spoons. Not 4. She placed them on the rough-hewn table, her small hands moving with a solemn purpose. When the oatmeal was ready, Abigail gently woke Rose. The 2 girls ate together at the table, whispering and giggling in the way that only children can, their innocence a stark contrast to the oppressive gloom of the house. Abigail ate, standing by the stove. Samuel did not join them. He remained by the fire, a solitary sentinel guarding his grief. The day stretched on, long and quiet. Abigail, unable to bear the idleness and the dust, began to clean. It was a way to keep her hands busy, to stop her mind from dwelling on her own loss, her own uncertain future. She started in the kitchen, scrubbing the soot from the pots, organizing the pantry, wiping down the shelves. She worked with a quiet efficiency, restoring a small corner of order to a house that had been surrendered to chaos. Samuel watched her from his chair. She could feel his resentment, his unspoken accusation that she was invading his space, disturbing the ghosts he had so carefully preserved. But he said nothing. He simply sat and watched, his disapproval a palpable presence in the room. In the afternoon, she moved into the main room. As she dusted the heavy furniture, her cloth moved across a small, framed photograph on the mantelpiece. She picked it up. It was a picture of Samuel's family. Samuel, younger, with a rare smile that transformed his hard face. A woman with dark, kind eyes and a gentle smile, her arm linked through his. And a small boy, a mirror image of his father, sitting on Samuel's shoulders, his face alight with laughter. Hannah stood beside her mother, her hand in hers. A happy family, frozen in time, before the flood had washed it all away. Her name was Sarah, Samuel said, his voice startlingly close. He had moved from his chair and was standing behind her. My boy was named Thomas, the same name as her late husband. Abigail's heart gave a painful lurch. She carefully placed the photograph back on the mantel. They were beautiful, she said, her voice thick. They were, he said, and the simple finality of his words was more heart-wrenching than any outpouring of grief. He turned and walked back to his chair, the brief moment of connection severed. The wall was back up, higher and thicker than before. Abigail continued her work, her movements now more subdued. She felt as though she was trespassing on holy ground. Every object in this house was a relic, a piece of a life that had been loved and lost. She was not just cleaning a house. She was disturbing a tomb. Later that afternoon, the children, bundled in borrowed coats that were too big for them, begged to be let outside. The snow had stopped falling, and the sun, though weak, cast a pale light over the white landscape. Samuel, after a long moment of hesitation, agreed. He watched from the doorway as Abigail helped the two girls build a lopsided snowman near the porch. Rose's laughter rang out in the crisp, cold air, a sound of pure joy. Hannah, though still silent, had a small, hesitant smile on her face as she packed a snowball in her mittened hands. For a few minutes, the oppressive weight of the house was forgotten. They were just two little girls playing in the snow. Abigail watched them, a lump in her throat. She saw in them the ghost of the childhood her own daughter had lost, the carefree innocence that had been stolen by grief and hardship. She saw, too, a flicker of life in Hannah, a spark that had been buried but not extinguished. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the silence. A large branch, heavy with snow, broke from one of the tall pine trees at the edge of the clearing and crashed to the ground, sending up a shower of white. The girls screamed, more in surprise than in fear, and ran back to the house, tumbling into Abigail's arms. Samuel was on the porch in an instant, his face a mask of alarm, his hand instinctively going to the pistol at his hip. When he saw that the girls were unharmed, his posture relaxed, but the fear in his eyes remained. He looked at the fallen branch, then at the trees, then at the sky, as if seeing threats everywhere. This land had taken everything from him. He would not let it take anything more. He herded them all back inside, his voice rough. That's enough. It's not safe. He bolted the door behind them, shutting out the world once more. The brief moment of light was over. They were back in the tomb. That evening, as Abigail tucked Rose into the bed in the cold guest room, her daughter's words surprised her. Hannah is sad, Mama, she whispered. Her mama and brother are in heaven, with Papa. Abigail smoothed her daughter's hair back from her forehead. Yes, sweetheart, they are. Does that mean they can see us? Rose asked, her blue eyes wide. I believe so, Abigail said softly. Is that why Hannah thinks you're a mama? The question hung in the air between them, simple and yet profound. Abigail did not know how to answer it. She did not understand the workings of a grieving child's mind. She only knew that when Hannah looked at her, she saw something more than a stranger. She saw a hope, a possibility, a prayer answered. "I don't know, Rose," she finally said, "but we can be her friends. We can be kind to her. That's what your papa would want us to do." She kissed her daughter goodnight and went back downstairs, her heart heavy. Samuel was not in his chair. The house was quiet. She found him in the barn, the lantern light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. He was tending to his horse, his movements slow and methodical. The barn was cold, but it smelled of hay and leather and life, a welcome change from the stagnant air of the house. He did not look up as she approached. "You should be in the house," he said. "It's cold out here." "I wanted to thank you again," she said, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders, "for taking us in. You saved our lives." He shrugged, continuing to brush the horse's flank. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," she said softly. "Not everyone." She hesitated, then took a breath. "Mr. Blackwood." "Samuel, I know this is difficult for you. Us being here. If there was anywhere else for us to go, we would." He stopped his work and turned to face her. In the dim lantern light, the lines on his face seemed deeper, his eyes darker. "It's not your fault," he said, his voice low. "It's just, this house hasn't had a woman's touch, or a child's laughter, in a long time. It feels strange." "I know," she said. "I can't imagine what you've been through." A muscle worked in his jaw. "No," he said, and his voice was raw with a pain that was still fresh, still bleeding. "You can't." He turned his back to her, picking up his brush again, the conversation over. Abigail stood there for a moment longer, then quietly left the barn, the cold of the night seeping into her bones. She had come here seeking shelter from a storm, but she had stumbled into the heart of a blizzard of grief, and she did not know if any of them would ever find their way out. The days that followed fell into a quiet routine. Abigail would rise early, cook a simple breakfast, and then set about bringing the house back to life. She scrubbed floors, mended curtains, and even found a tin of polish and brought a dull shine back to the wooden furniture. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and it kept the darkness at bay. Samuel remained distant, a silent observer of her activities. He would disappear for hours at a time, checking his fences or tending to his small herd of cattle, which he kept in a sheltered valley a mile from the house. He spoke only when necessary, his words clipped and devoid of emotion. But Abigail noticed small changes. He started eating his meals at the table with them, instead of by the fire. He no longer flinched when he heard Rose laugh. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, she would catch him watching Hannah, a flicker of something that looked like hope in his tired eyes. Hannah, for her part, had attached herself to Abigail like a shadow. She followed her from room to room, her small hands often reaching out to touch the fabric of Abigail's dress, as if to reassure herself that she was real. She still did not speak, but she had begun to communicate in other ways. She would bring Abigail a flower she had found pressed in a book, or a pretty stone she had saved, and she would sit for hours watching Abigail work, her solemn gaze a mixture of adoration and a deep, unspoken longing. The bond between the two girls grew stronger with each passing day. They were inseparable, creating their own small world in the midst of the adult sorrow that surrounded them. They played with Hannah's carved wooden animals, giving them names and voices. They drew pictures with charcoal from the fireplace on scraps of old paper. And in their shared, quiet world, Hannah began to heal. One afternoon, Abigail found them in the dusty, disused nursery. Rose was holding the faceless corn husk doll, rocking it back and forth, and humming a lullaby. Hannah was sitting on the floor, carefully arranging the wooden animals in a line. She was making small, quiet sounds, little hums and whispers, as she played. It was not speech, not yet, but it was a beginning. Abigail's heart swelled. She backed out of the room, leaving them to their game, not wanting to break the fragile spell. That evening, a crisis occurred. One of the cows had wandered off from the herd and had gotten stuck in a deep snowdrift in the valley. Samuel came back to the house at dusk, his face grim. "I need to get her out," he said, pulling on his heavy coat. "She'll freeze to death if I leave her there overnight." "It's getting dark," Abigail said, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. "And another storm is coming. I can see the clouds." "I have no choice," he said, his jaw set. She's one of the few I have left. You can't go alone, she said, making a decision. It's too dangerous. I'm coming with you. He looked at her, his eyes narrowed. You can't. You're a woman. Abigail's chin lifted. I'm stronger than I look. I grew up on a farm. I know my way around livestock. And you can't pull a full-grown cow out of a snowdrift by yourself. You need help. He hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Fine, but stay close. And do exactly as I say. She bundled the children up in blankets by the fire, giving them strict instructions not to move until they returned. Then she pulled on a pair of Samuel's old boots and a heavy coat and followed him out into the biting wind. The journey to the valley was treacherous. The wind was rising, whipping the snow into a blinding frenzy. It was dark now, and the only light came from the lantern Samuel carried, its yellow glow a small, fragile beacon in the vast, stormy darkness. They walked in single file, Samuel in the lead, his broad shoulders breaking a path through the deep snow. Abigail followed close behind, her head down against the wind, her lungs burning with the cold air. They found the cow trapped in a drift up to its belly, bawling pitifully. She was exhausted and frightened. It took them over an hour of hard, back-breaking work to free her. They dug away the snow with their hands and a small shovel Samuel had brought, and then, using ropes, they pulled and pushed and cajoled the terrified animal until she was finally on solid ground. By the time they were done, they were both exhausted, soaked to the skin, and half frozen. The storm was now a full-blown blizzard, the wind howling like a banshee. They could barely see a few feet in front of them. We need to find shelter, Samuel shouted over the wind. We'll never make it back to the house in this. He grabbed her hand, his grip strong and sure, and pulled her toward a dark shape looming in the swirling snow. It was a small line cabin, a primitive one-room shelter he used in the summer when he was grazing his cattle in the high country. It wasn't much, but it was a refuge from the storm. Inside, it was dark and bitterly cold. Samuel fumbled for a match and lit a small, pot-bellied stove in the corner. He found some dry wood stacked against the wall, and soon a small fire was crackling, casting a warm, flickering light around the small cabin. They shed their wet coats and huddled close to the stove, shivering. Abigail's teeth were chattering uncontrollably. Samuel handed her a rough wool blanket from a nearby bunk. Get warm, he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He took another blanket and wrapped it around his own shoulders. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside. The small cabin felt like a tiny, fragile lifeboat on a vast and angry sea. In the close confines of the cabin, the distance that Samuel had so carefully maintained between them seemed to dissolve. They were no longer a grieving rancher and a lost widow. They were just two people, cold and tired, seeking refuge from the storm. You were right, he said finally, his voice a low rumble. I couldn't have done it without you. We did it together, she said, her voice still trembling from the cold. He looked at her then, his gaze direct and searching. In the firelight, she could see the exhaustion etched on his face, but she could also see something else, something she had not seen before. A vulnerability, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. Why are you so kind? He asked, the question seeming to be pulled from a place deep inside him. To me? To Hannah? After everything. Abigail pulled the blanket tighter around her. Because I know what it's like, she said softly. To lose someone. To feel like the world has ended. Kindness is all we have left when everything else is gone. He stared into the fire, his face a mask of sorrow. I haven't been kind, he said, his voice thick with self-recrimination. I don't know what I've been. Lost. You've been grieving, she said gently. There's no right or wrong way to do that. I should have been there, he whispered, his voice cracking. The creek, it rose so fast. I was mending a fence on the north pasture. I told them to stay in the house. But Thomas, he loved to fish. He must have slipped. And Sarah, she would have gone in after him. She wouldn't have hesitated. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. Abigail's heart broke for him. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. He leaned into her touch, like a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. She said nothing, offering him the silent comfort of her presence as the storm of his grief finally, after a year of being held back, broke free. They sat like that for a long time, two strangers huddled together in a storm, sharing a sorrow that was too heavy to carry alone. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and in the heart of the blizzard, something shifted. A wall came down. A seed of hope, small and fragile, began to take root. They did not sleep. They sat by the dwindling fire, the silence between them no longer heavy with unspoken grief, but filled with a fragile, tentative peace. Samuel, his confession having broken the dam of his sorrow, spoke of his wife, Sarah. He told Abigail how they had met, how they had built a ranch from nothing, his words painting a picture of a life filled with love and hard work. He spoke of his son, Thomas, a boy who was fearless and full of laughter, who loved the creek that had ultimately taken him. Abigail listened, her heart aching for him. She, in turn, shared her own story of loss. She spoke of her Thomas, a kind and gentle man, a dreamer who had always believed in a better life just over the horizon. She told him of their small farm in Ohio, of the illness that had taken him so suddenly, leaving her with nothing but a letter to a cousin she had never met and a future that was a terrifying blank. In that small, snowbound cabin, they were no longer strangers. They were two souls who had navigated the same dark waters of grief and had found, in each other's stories, a shared humanity. They were survivors. The storm broke just before dawn. The wind died, and a pale, watery light began to seep through the single small window. The world outside was transformed, a landscape of immense, silent beauty. "We should go," Samuel said, his voice raspy. "The children will be worried." The journey back was easier. The wind had died down, and the sun, now climbing above the horizon, cast a dazzling light on the snow. They walked side by side, no longer in single file. The space between them had shrunk. When they reached a deep drift, Samuel reached out his hand to help her, and this time, Abigail took it without hesitation. His hand was rough and calloused, but his grip was warm and steady. They saw the smoke from the chimney first, a thin gray ribbon against the brilliant blue sky. As they got closer, the front door flew open. Rose and Hannah stood there, their small faces etched with worry. "Mama," Rose cried, running toward them and flinging herself into Abigail's arms. Hannah did not run. She stood on the porch, her gaze fixed on her father. She watched as he helped Abigail up the last few steps, their hands still linked. Then she looked at his face, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time in a year. A small, tremulous smile touched her lips. That day, the house felt different. The oppressive gloom had lifted, replaced by a sense of quiet hope. Samuel was a changed man. The hard, bitter shell he had worn for so long had cracked. He spoke to the children, his voice gentle. He helped Abigail prepare the midday meal, his large hands surprisingly deft as he chopped vegetables. And he smiled. It was a small, rusty thing, as if he had forgotten how, but it was there, and it transformed his face, chasing the shadows from his eyes. In the afternoon, he brought out a wooden chest from his bedroom. "These were Sarah's," he said, his voice soft. He opened it. Inside were books, a sewing kit, and a small wooden flute. She loved to read, and she played this for the children in the evenings. He handed the flute to Abigail. Hesitantly, she put the flute to her lips and blew. A few discordant notes filled the air, and the children giggled. She tried again, and this time, a simple, clear melody emerged. She played a lullaby her own mother had taught her, a sweet, simple tune that filled the quiet house with a warmth it had not known in a very long time. Samuel sat in his chair by the fire, but he was not a distant observer anymore. He was present. He listened to the music, his eyes closed, a faint, sad smile on his face. He was not replacing the memory of his wife, Abigail realized. He was learning to live with it. He was making room for new memories, new music, new life. The days that followed were a time of gentle healing. The snow began to melt under the strengthening sun, and the world outside their small cabin began to reawaken. The path to the east would soon be clear. The thought of leaving, which had once been a desperate hope, now filled Abigail with a strange sense of dread. This place, this house of sorrow, had become a sanctuary. She looked at Samuel, at Hannah, at the life they were beginning to build from the ashes of their grief, and she realized, with a startling clarity, that she did not want to go. Her cousin's ranch, her original destination, now seemed like a distant, foreign land. This felt like home. But their newfound peace was fragile, and the world outside the valley had not forgotten them. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon. He was a tall man on a fine horse, and he rode with an air of authority. As he got closer, Abigail saw the silver star pinned to his coat. A sheriff. Samuel went out to meet him, his face suddenly tense. Abigail watched from the doorway, her heart pounding. The sheriff dismounted, a friendly but firm smile on his face. "Sam," he said, nodding to Samuel. "Good to see you're still in one piece. We were about to send out a search party." He looked past Samuel to Abigail. "And you must be Mrs. Miller. Your cousin, John Cartwright, has been worried sick. Sent a wire from Cheyenne a week ago. Said you were overdue." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her cousin. He was looking for her. The life she was supposed to have, the map she had been trying to follow, had found her. "He's at the Parker homestead, just over the pass," the sheriff continued. "He's waiting for you there. The pass is clear enough to travel now. I can escort you and your daughter there tomorrow morning." It was not a question. It was a plan, a final arrangement that did not include her input. Abigail looked at Samuel. His face was unreadable, his eyes guarded. The wall was back up, not as high as before, but it was there. He had known this day would come. He had been preparing for it. "Thank you, Sheriff," Samuel said, his voice steady. "We appreciate you riding all this way." The sheriff nodded, tipped his hat to Abigail, and rode away, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. The finality of it was suffocating. Tomorrow. It was over. The strange, beautiful, painful interlude in her life was coming to an end. She would have to pack her meager belongings, say goodbye to this man and his daughter, and walk back out into the world, back to a life she did not know if she wanted anymore. That evening, the meal was a somber affair. The tentative joy that had filled the house in the past few days was gone, replaced by an unspoken sadness. The children sensed it, too. They were quiet and subdued, their usual laughter absent. After the children were in bed, Abigail found Samuel in the barn, just as she had on that first night. He was mending a piece of leather tack, his hands moving with a focused intensity that told her he did not want to be disturbed. "So," he said without looking up, "your cousin?" "Yes," she said softly. "I never met him. He was my husband's cousin, really. He's a good man," Samuel said. "A hard worker. Has a fine piece of land over on the Sweetwater." He was giving her a recommendation, she realized, as if she were a prospective employee. He was making it easy for her to leave. "Samuel," she began, her voice trembling slightly. He stood up then and faced her, and the raw pain in his eyes stole the words from her mouth. "You have to go, Abigail," he said, his voice low and strained. "This is no place for you. I have nothing to offer you but a house full of ghosts and a heart that's half dead." "That's not true," she whispered. "It is," he insisted, his voice rough with emotion. "You're like the first sun after a long winter. You've brought this place back to life. You've given me back my daughter. But you deserve more than this. You deserve a life of your own, not one built on the ruins of mine. Your cousin can give you that. A fresh start. No ghosts. No memories." Tears streamed down her face. "What if I don't want a fresh start?" she asked, her voice cracking. "What if this is where I want to be?" He took a step toward her, his hand reaching out as if to touch her face. Then he let it drop to his side. He shook his head, a look of profound sorrow on his face. "You don't know what you're saying," he said. "You've been trapped here. You haven't had a choice. Tomorrow, you will." He turned his back to her, a gesture of finality that was more painful than any harsh word. "Go get some sleep, Abigail. You have a long journey ahead of you." She stood there for a long moment, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. Then she turned and fled back to the house, the cold night air balm on her hot cheeks. He was right. He had to be right. She had a daughter to think of, a future to secure. This place, this man, this fragile hope, it was a beautiful dream, but it was not her reality. Her reality was waiting for her over the pass, in a life she had been chosen for, not one she had chosen for herself. She packed her small satchel, her movements slow and deliberate. Every object in the room, the worn quilt, the lavender-scented wardrobe, the Bible on the nightstand, felt like a piece of a life she was leaving behind. a life she had only just begun to live. She was just about to blow out the lamp when a small figure appeared in her doorway. It was Hannah. The little girl was clutching her corn husk doll, her large, dark eyes filled with a fear that mirrored Abigail's own. She walked slowly to Abigail's side and held out a small, folded piece of paper. It was one of the drawings she and Rose had made. It showed 4 figures, crudely drawn but unmistakable. A tall man, a woman with braided blonde hair, and 2 small girls, all holding hands under a brightly shining sun. Abigail's breath hitched. She looked at Hannah, whose lower lip was trembling. The little girl's eyes pleaded with her, a silent, desperate appeal. Then, she did something that was both a miracle and a heartbreak. She pointed to the drawing of the woman with the braided hair. She looked up at Abigail, her small face a mess of tears and hope. And in a voice that was clear and strong, a voice that was no longer a whisper but a declaration, she said the word that had started it all. Mama. It was not a mistake this time. It was not the confused hope of a grieving child. It was a choice, a plea, a claim. In that moment, everything became clear. Her cousin, the ranch on the Sweetwater, the safe and sensible future that awaited her, it all faded away. It was a map to a life she did not want. Her life, her home, was here, in this house of ghosts that was slowly, painstakingly, learning to live again. She knelt and pulled the little girl into her arms, holding her tight. I'm here, she whispered into her tangled hair. I'm not going anywhere. Over Hannah's small, trembling shoulder, she saw Samuel standing in the hallway. He had seen and heard everything. He was leaning against the doorframe, his face pale, his eyes shining with unshed tears. The wall was gone. All the walls were gone. He walked into the room, his movements slow, as if in a dream. He knelt beside them, and his large, rough hand came to rest on his daughter's back. He looked at Abigail, his gaze searching her face, and what he saw there seemed to be the answer to a question he had been afraid to ask. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His eyes said it all. Stay. Abigail nodded, the tears now flowing freely. I will. And in that small, quiet room, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the fragile hope of the future, a new family was born. Not a family of blood, but a family of choice. A family forged in the heart of a blizzard, built on a foundation of shared sorrow, and cemented by the love of 2 little girls who had refused to give up on a miracle. The widow had arrived at the wrong ranch, but she had found her way home. The next morning, the sheriff arrived as promised, his horse kicking up slushy snow in the rapidly thawing yard. He was a man of his word, ready to escort the widow to her new life. He dismounted, a brisk, professional smile on his face, expecting to find Abigail and her daughter packed and ready to go. Instead, he found them on the porch. All 4 of them. Abigail stood with Rose's hand held firmly in hers. Samuel stood beside her, his arm resting gently, protectively, on Hannah's shoulder. They were not positioned like a rancher and his temporary guests. They stood like a family, a small, solid fortress against the world. Sheriff, Abigail said, her voice clear and steady. I appreciate you coming all this way, but we won't be needing that escort. I've decided to stay. The sheriff's smile faltered. He looked from Abigail's determined face to Samuel's quiet resolve, and then to the 2 little girls standing side by side. He was a man who understood the ways of the world, but he also understood the ways of the heart. He saw the story in their eyes, the one that had unfolded in this isolated valley while the world was covered in snow. Is that your final word, ma'am? He asked, his tone softening. It is, Abigail said. He looked at Samuel. You're sure about this, Sam? Taking on a wife and another child? It's a heavy burden. Samuel's gaze fell on Abigail, and the look that passed between them was more binding than any vow spoken before a preacher. It's the lightest burden I've carried in a year, Sheriff, he said, his voice filled with a conviction that left no room for argument. The sheriff nodded slowly, a real smile finally touching his lips. He was a man who dealt in facts and laws, but he knew a happy ending when he saw one. Well, he said, tipping his hat, I'll let your cousin know. Can't say he'll be pleased, but a man can't force a woman to a future she doesn't want. He mounted his horse, gave them one last, long look, and then turned and rode away, the matter settled. As he disappeared over the rise, a profound sense of peace settled over the small group on the porch. The door to the past had closed. The road not taken had vanished. Before them was a new path, one they would walk together. Spring arrived at Blackwood Creek Ranch not as a gentle guest, but as a muddy, chaotic, and glorious force of nature. The last of the snow melted, swelling the creek until it roared, no longer a place of sorrow, but a symbol of life's relentless, churning power. The land, once a canvas of white and gray, exploded into a riot of green. Wildflowers pushed their way through the damp earth, dotting the valley with splashes of purple, yellow, and blue. The house, too, underwent a transformation. Abigail, with Samuel's help, aired out the rooms, letting the fresh spring breeze chase away the last of the winter gloom. She planted a small garden near the kitchen, her hands sinking into the rich, dark soil with a sense of profound satisfaction. She was planting roots, both literally and figuratively. Samuel was a man reborn. The grief had not vanished. It was a part of him now, a scar on his heart, but it no longer defined him. He worked with a renewed purpose, his broad shoulders seeming less burdened, his step lighter. He taught Abigail how to mend fences, how to read the sky for signs of rain, how to handle a rifle with a steady hand. She, in turn, taught him how to laugh again. Their days were filled with the rhythm of hard work and the simple joys of building a life together. They were a partnership in every sense of the word. And in the quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sit on the porch, not needing to speak, simply content to be in each other's presence, listening to the symphony of the spring night. Their love story was not one of grand passion or flowery words. It was a quiet, sturdy thing, built on a foundation of shared loss and mutual respect. It grew slowly, carefully, like the seedlings in Abigail's garden. It was in the way he brought her a cup of coffee in the morning, just the way she liked it. It was in the way she mended a tear in his favorite shirt, her stitches small and neat. It was in the lingering touches of their hands as they worked side by side. It was a love that was as real and as solid as the land itself. One evening, as a warm summer breeze rustled the leaves of the cottonwood trees, Samuel turned to her on the porch. He took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "Abigail," he said, his voice low and serious. "I never thought I would say this to another woman. I never thought I would want to. But I want to marry you. I want to make this family real in the eyes of God and the law." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. She had found more than just a home here. She had found a love she never expected to find again. "Yes, Samuel," she whispered. "Yes." They were married a month later, not in a church, but on the porch of the ranch house, under the wide, endless Wyoming sky. The preacher from a nearest town, a kind, elderly man with a weathered face, made the journey to officiate. The only guests were the mountains, the creek, and the two little girls who had brought them all together. Rose was the flower girl, scattering petals she had picked from the garden. And Hannah, her voice now as bright and clear as a songbird's, stood beside her father as his witness. She wore the blue calico dress that had belonged to her mother, which Abigail had carefully altered to fit her. It was not a gesture of replacement, but of honor, a way of weaving the past into the fabric of the future. But the world outside the valley had a long memory. One afternoon in late summer, as they were preparing for the coming harvest, a rider appeared. It was not the sheriff this time. This man was a stranger, dressed in city clothes that looked out of place in the rugged landscape. He rode an expensive horse and had an air of impatient authority about him. He dismounted and strode toward the house without waiting for an invitation. "I'm looking for Abigail Miller," he said, his voice sharp and demanding. It was a voice used to giving orders and being obeyed. Abigail stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. Samuel moved to stand beside her, his hand resting near the pistol at his hip. "I am Abigail," she said, her voice calm, though her heart had begun to beat a little faster. "I am John Cartwright," the man announced, as if the name itself should command respect. "Your cousin, or your late husband's cousin, to be precise." He looked around the ranch, his lip curling in a faint sneer. "This is where you've been? I expected better. The sheriff told me you'd taken up with some backwoods rancher." His gaze fell on Samuel, and it was filled with a dismissive contempt. "I've come to take you and the girl to my home," he said, turning back to Abigail. "It's what your husband would have wanted." I have a proper place for you. A real home. Not this shack. Abigail's spine stiffened. This man, this stranger, was the safe future she had been told about. A future that felt cold and brittle. I'm afraid you've wasted your journey, Mr. Cartwright, she said, her voice firm. This is my home now, and this is my husband, Samuel Blackwood. Cartwright's face darkened with anger. Husband? You married this nobody? After everything I've done for you? I sent you money for your passage. I arranged a place for you. You owe me. I owe you nothing. Abigail said, her voice rising. The money you sent was a pittance, and it was gone before I even left Ohio. We made our way here on our own, and we have made our own life here. This is not a life. Cartwright spat, his voice laced with venom. It's a disgrace to your husband's memory. I won't allow it. You and the girl are coming with me. Now. He took a step toward her, his hand reaching out to grab her arm. In a flash, Samuel was between them, his body a solid wall. You will not touch my wife, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Cartwright sneered. And what are you going to do about it, rancher? He's not going to do anything, Abigail said, her voice ringing with a strength she never knew she possessed. She stepped out from behind Samuel, her eyes blazing. Because you're going to get on your horse, and you're going to leave. You are not welcome here. You speak of my husband's memory, but you know nothing of him. He was a kind man. He would never have wanted me to be with someone as cruel and arrogant as you. We are not your property, Mr. Cartwright. We are a family, and you are trespassing. For a long moment, Cartwright simply stared at her, his mouth agape, stunned into silence by her fierce defiance. He looked from her to Samuel, to the two little girls who were now peeking out from behind the door, their eyes wide. He saw a united front, a wall of love and loyalty that he could not breach. With a curse, he turned on his heel, stomped back to his horse, and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and impotent rage in his wake. They stood on the porch and watched until he was gone, a small, insignificant speck on the vast horizon. Then Abigail let out a long, shaky breath and leaned against her husband. Samuel's arm came around her, holding her tight. You were magnificent, he whispered into her hair. She looked up at him, a slow smile spreading across her face. I was terrified. I know, he said, his own smile matching hers. But you did it anyway. They had faced the ghosts of the past. Now they had faced the world, and they had won. Their future was their own, bought and paid for not with money or land, but with courage, kindness, and a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of places. That night, as the first stars began to appear in the velvet sky, the four of them sat on the porch. The air was cool, hinting at the coming autumn. Hannah was nestled in Samuel's lap, her head resting on his chest, fast asleep. Rose was leaning against Abigail, her eyes heavy. A deep, profound sense of peace settled over them. They were home. They were safe. They were together. The widow had arrived at the wrong ranch, but in doing so, she had found everything she had ever been looking for. She had found a place where a broken family could be made whole again, a place where a silent child could find her voice, and a place where a lost heart could finally, truly, be found. The years that followed were etched into the land itself. The Blackwood Creek Ranch, once a monument to sorrow, became a testament to life. The small cabin was expanded, room by room, board by board, each addition a new chapter in their story. The herd of cattle grew, and the fields yielded harvests that were a testament to their shared labor. The sound of laughter became as common as the call of the meadowlark in the morning. Rose and Hannah grew from little girls into young women, their bond as sisters unbreakable. Rose, with her mother's braided blonde hair and her father Thomas's kind heart, was the steady, gentle soul of the family. Hannah, who had inherited Samuel's dark intensity and Sarah's quiet strength, was the fiery, protective one. They were two halves of a whole, their differences complementing each other perfectly. They learned to ride before they could properly read, their skills on horseback a legend in the sparse community that dotted the territory. They were the Blackwood girls, known for their skill, their spirit, and their fierce loyalty to one another. One crisp autumn evening, nearly a decade after that first fateful snowstorm, Abigail and Samuel sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the granite peaks. The sky was awash in fiery color, a breathtaking spectacle that never grew old. Samuel, his hair now streaked with gray at the temples, reached for his wife's hand. The lines on his face were no longer etched by grief, but by laughter and long days under the sun. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked, his voice a low, comfortable rumble. "The day you came here." Abigail smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Every day," she said softly. "I think about how lost I was, how cold, how certain I was that I had made the worst mistake of my life." "It was the best mistake that ever happened to me," he said, his grip tightening on her hand. From the barn, they could hear the sound of their daughters' voices, raised in a playful argument over whose turn it was to feed the horses. The sound was music, the sweetest melody in the world. "She called me Mama," Abigail whispered, the memory still as clear as if it were yesterday. "Hannah." She looked at me, and she said Mama. It was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was there. "She saw what I was too blind to see," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "She saw our future. She saw you." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a love that was as deep and as enduring as the mountains that surrounded them. "You didn't just save me, Abigail. You gave me a reason to be saved. You brought the sun back to this valley." Abigail looked out at the land, at the house they had built, at the life they had forged from the ashes of two separate tragedies. The letter in her pocket all those years ago had been a map to a life of safety and obligation with a man she didn't know. But by getting lost, she had found her true direction. She had found a man whose soul mirrored her own, a daughter who had chosen her, and a love that had redeemed them all. This was the story of a journey that ended at the wrong destination, only to find the right home. It was proof that sometimes the greatest blessings are disguised as our biggest mistakes. Here in the heart of the unforgiving Wyoming wilderness, a place of endings had become a place of new beginnings. For the widow, the rancher, and the two little girls who led them to each other, this wasn't just a life. It was a miracle, a testament to the enduring belief that even after the longest, coldest winter, love, like the spring, will always find a way to bloom. And so, the sun sets on Blackwood Creek Ranch, a home not found on any map, but one that was built, board by board, with courage, kindness, and a love that was strong enough to silence a blizzard. The story may be over, but the feeling, we hope, remains with you. Before we ride off into the sunset ourselves, we want to take a moment to connect with you, the person on the other side of this screen. Our stories travel far and wide, carried on these digital winds, and it means the world to us to know where they land. So, if you would, please let us know in the comments below, where in the world are you watching from today? Is this story warming a hearth in the rolling hills of Scotland? Is it bringing a little frontier spirit to a bustling city in the Philippines? Or perhaps keeping someone company on a quiet afternoon in Ohio? Knowing how far this family's journey has traveled truly makes our day. It turns this channel from a simple broadcast into a global campfire, with all of us gathered around it. And as you're typing, if this story touched your heart in any way, if you felt that chill of the blizzard right along with Samuel and Abigail in that tiny cabin, if your heart swelled when little Hannah finally found her voice again, would you consider giving this video a like by clicking that small thumbs up button? It may seem like such a simple thing, a single click, but for our channel, it's like a signal fire on a distant hill. It tells the great, mysterious world of YouTube that there are people out there who cherish these kinds of stories. Stories with heart, with depth, and with a belief in the goodness of people. Your like helps other folks, people just like you, find their way to our campfire. And while you're there, we would be so honored if you shared a piece of your heart with us. What did you think of the story? What part of it will stay with you? Was it the quiet strength of Abigail, a woman who faced the unknown with nothing but a hope and a prayer? Was it the slow, painful thawing of Samuel's grief-stricken heart? Or was it the unwavering faith of a little girl who whispered a prayer and saw it answered? Every single comment is read and cherished by our small team. Your thoughts and your feelings are the very fuel that keeps our creative fires burning. They tell us what resonates with you, what you want to see more of, and they inspire us to dig deeper, to find more tales of love and redemption from the annals of the Old West. Your engagement is, without a doubt, the single most important thing that allows us to continue creating these stories for you. So, if you believe that stories like this matter, If you want to ensure that more of them get told, then we humbly invite you to subscribe to our channel, Wild West Love Stories. By subscribing, you're doing more than just getting updates. You are officially joining our community. You're becoming part of a family of viewers who appreciate a story well told. And be sure to click that little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. That bell is our promise to you, a promise that you'll never miss a single story. You'll be the first to know when we've got a new tale of romance, survival, and unbreakable spirit ready for you. Thank you, truly, for spending your valuable time with us today, for allowing Abigail, Samuel, Rose, and Hannah into your home and into your heart. Until our trails cross again, this is Wild West Love Stories, reminding you that sometimes the most beautiful homes aren't found on a map. They're found in the heart.